Thank you for joining us tonight. On screen, we are sharing a pre-event slideshow. Gold text on a white background. Live from NYPL logo. Live from NYPL presents Simply New York, Writing the City. Featuring Susan Choi, Marlon James, Robert Jones Jr., Minjin Lee, and Isaac Fitzgerald. December 10th, 2020, 8 p.m. EST. Black text on a white background. Recommended reading. Tonight's panelists share some of their favorite titles. Isaac Fitzgerald, From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil Frankweiler by E.L. Konigsberg. Minjin Lee, Begin Again by Eddie S. Glaude. Robert Jones Jr., These Ghosts Are Family by Maisie Card. The complete list of recommendations can be found on tonight's event page at nypl.org/live. Accessible formats available through nypl.org/talkingbooks. Contactless checkout is available at more than 50 grab-and-go locations. nypl.org/grab-and-go. Black text on a white background. Live from NYPL upcoming events. Monday, December 14th, 8 p.m. EST. Homegrown Heroes, Desus and Miro with Lovia Giacha. The hosts of the Bodega Boys podcast and the Showtime late night series Desus and Miro take the wisdom they've collected over years of trials, tribulations, and a few misdemeanors to look back on the year that was 2020 for New York and spread some love for their city. Tuesday, December 15th, 8 p.m. EST. The Last Million, David Nassau with Atina Grossman. The best-selling author and historian presents a sweeping new history that tracks the fates of the 1 million refugees left behind in Germany after World War II. For more information and to register, visit nypl.org/live. Black text on a white background. Live from NYPL upcoming events. Wednesday, December 16th, 8 p.m. EST. Investing in Each Other, Aminatou Sow and Anne Friedman with Rebecca Traister. Making friends isn't easy, particularly now. Neither is holding on to friendships. The hosts of the hit podcast Call Your Girlfriend explain why you need to fight for them. Thursday, December 17th, 8 p.m. EST. So long, 2020. Join some of our favorite comedians for a bit of relief as they look back on the year that was and what it has meant to be a New Yorker, a funny New Yorker, during these tumultuous times. Featuring Michelle Buteau, Matteo Lane, Aparna Nancherla, and Ophira Eisenberg. For more information and to register, visit nypl.org/live.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Live from NYPL. My name is Aidan Flax Clark, and I am one of the many worker bees working behind the scenes to bring you our Live from NYPL events. And I want to thank you for being with us tonight. We have a pretty incredible group of writers with us tonight, too. I'm super stoked to get to introduce them. The collective impact that their work has had on me is totally monumental. And I'm sure that that is true for everyone who's watching tonight. They have all agreed to share some of their time and some of their spirit in support of something that the library is trying to do throughout the month of December, which is to deliver a bit of love to the city we serve at the end of this terrible year. We're delivering that love library style, which is to say with books and writers through story times and New York themed book lists and events like tonight. We are celebrating the endurance and the resilience of New York and the many people, arts, and cultures that continue to give it life and will continue to give it life. And I'd like to thank all of tonight's guests and all of you who are watching to be here with us for it. I'd also like to give special thanks to our moderator tonight, Isaac Fitzgerald, who came to us with this idea many months ago. Isaac, you are a delight to work with and an open-hearted, enthusiastic, and inspired collaborator and cheerleader. Just a few quick housekeeping items, and then we'll bring everyone on. Real-time captions are available for tonight's program via stream text. If you need the link now, it should be in the chats in Zoom and in YouTube. If you'd like to ask questions for any of tonight's guests, you can do that now or at any time during the conversation in Zoom, in YouTube, or you can email us at publicprograms@nypl.org, and they'll answer as many as they can at the end. Lastly, Live from NYPL is going to close out 2020 with a big week next week. Live from NYPL events will discuss the plight of Jewish refugees in the years after World War II with David Nassau, celebrate Big Friendship with Aminatou Sow and Ann Friedman and Rebecca Traister, get schooled in life lessons from the Bronx with Desus and Mero, and say a not so fond farewell to 2020 with comedians Michelle Buteau, Mateo Lane, Aparna Nancherla, and Ophira Eisenberg. We'd love to see you at all of them. So if you'd like to register, you can go to nypl.org/live to sign up. Okay, that's it. Let's please welcome Susan Choi, Marlon James, Robert Jones Jr., Min Jin Lee, and Isaac Fitzgerald.
Give it up for Aiden. Let's give it up for all the people that are working at the NYPL. It's all right. I know we're all in separate places, but we can make some noise. If you're in a house where you can clap, go ahead, clap. You'll feel better. It'll be great.
For myself.
Oh my gosh, we got Marlon, we got Manchin, we got Roberts. Look at all this. We got Susan.
So much clapping.
Seriously, thank you all.
I feel like I'm in Pentecostal church. That wasn't a good memory.
I'm sorry for taking you back there, Marlon. I'm sorry for taking you back there. But I do appreciate that you're here tonight. Thank you so much to all our panelists for joining us. Thank you everyone that's watching. Happy Hanukkah. It's so wonderful to be here. And listen, just what Aiden said, basically, I just miss talking with writers in New York City about writing in New York City. So I wanted to do that tonight. I'm just gonna ask some questions. The idea is just to have a wonderful, lovely, free-flowing conversation. But I wanted to start with Robert, who is born and raised in New York City. But I'm gonna ask this to all of you, so start thinking. But when did you first fall in love with New York City, Robert?
I would say when I was about maybe 3 or 4, and I realized that New York City had subway trains, and none of the other places we visited, whether it was South Carolina or Georgia, where my family is from, had those things. And that was like a bit of marvelous technology to me. And it endeared the city to me in a way that I still can't explain. But there was something about seeing those trains. And this is in the 70s, mind you, when there was no air conditioning in the subway, on the subway cars. They had fans. I don't know if anyone remembers that. Mm-hmm. And every single train car was covered with graffiti, every single one. So that is my memory of New York City subways, and that is what made me fall in love with the city.
When you went other places, were you like, you know what, not into it? Like, where are your subways? Would you like, how do we get around?
They had nice trees and green spaces, but they did not have trains.
But they did not have trains. How about you, Minjin?
I actually have a visual. I don't know if you could see that.
Put it closer.
That's a train station. And that's actually inside of a train with the graffiti that Robert is talking about. I'm from here. It was really weird because when Robert's talking about it, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's like right next to my desk. So I came to the United States when I was 7 in 1976, and we came to Queens, New York. I feel like you're a real New Yorker if you're from the boroughs. So I'm from the boroughs and I grew up in Queens. I went to high school in the Bronx and I took the train 2 hours each way. Wow. That's 4 hours, and it was documented. So anyway, and I was barefoot and in the snow and uphill and really hard. Actually, I fell in love with New York when I went to college. So when I was in college in New Haven, I realized what an incredible place New York was, because Yale was like not my thing. So I think I realized just how normal the air was in New York for a person like me when I didn't feel very comfortable at Yale.
So basically it was by leaving the city that it made you realize how much you loved the city. What was it like to move here at the age of 7? What are some of like your earliest memories of being in the city?
I was so surprised because in Korea, I thought that America would be like in the fairy tales, like Cinderella. So I thought there was going to be like stagecoaches and people with really long, like, big hair like Marie Antoinette and ball gowns. And I get out of JFK and I'm going, it looks like Seoul. What the fuck? Oh, pardon me. My first F-bomb of the evening. Yeah, so I was really disappointed. And then, of course, I realized it was going to be okay because when I went to Queens, my uncle bought us all these bananas. And in Korea at the time, it's really expensive to buy bananas in 1976. And we just had this enormous vat of bananas. And my uncle said, you can have as many as you like. And when you're done, we'll buy you more. And I thought that was pretty cool.
You're like, I'm rich in bananas. No stagecoaches, but I'm rich in
right,
bananas.
Exactly.
Marlon, what about you?
So the ideal of New York is something that has kind of bewitched me for a long time. I think the first time I fell in love with New York, I was probably 4 or 5 watching Spider-Man cartoons, and wanting to live in that New York and thinking that New York actually exists. And growing up, falling in love with the New York in rap records, and
And this is all before you visited, right?
And it was funny because I was falling in love with this TV idea of New York, not realizing that all those New York TV shows were shot in Vancouver. So technically, I was falling in love with Vancouver, not really New York. And then you know what? And okay, total confession here. I really fell hard for New York the last time because of Sex and the City. And I really wanted Carrie, actually not Carrie Bradshaw because I couldn't stand her. I really wanted Samantha's New York.
Sure.
Also kind of wanted Samantha's sex life. But, but it was always this sort of fictional idea because the New York of the fictional imagination is almost its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And but and I'm probably the person who moved here the latest. I moved here in like 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
but I've been coming and going from New York for decades. And there used to be a time when I was living here. I remember once knowing that, realizing that if you live here for 6 months, you're living here illegally, you can be deported. But if you live here for 5 months and 29 days, then you're cool. So I lived here for 5 months and 29 days for years. I think because, I fell in love with New York. This will sound really hokey, but I think I fell in love with New York because I found a version of myself to fall in love with here.
Mm.
So I figured, this is where I should be. And I've been working to get here for years.
So after kind of falling in love with a fictionalized version, the time you actually spent here, it was more you found yourself here.
Yeah. I mean, the real life version isn't bad either. It can work.
Yeah, no, it's better transit system for sure. Susan, what about you?
I have a really specific memory, and it's funny, Min, when I was listening to you talk, we went to college together.
Yeah, we're in the same class.
At exactly the same time, right?
Yeah.
And so, but unlike you, coming to college, we went to Yale at the same time, was the first time I ever came to the Northeast. And I flew up on my own from Texas, where I was from, and landed at JFK. And I remember seeing New York out the window, this like very dirty looking gray, kind of enormous skyline, like unbelievably much, so much larger than I expected it to be. And then immediately getting on Connecticut limo, remember that? To get whisked up I-95 to New Haven. Connecticut limo, of course, was like a filthy minivan. Like
it sounds good though, yeah.
I know, I was told to look
good on paper.
And I was like, wow. But so I had that glimpse of New York, and then I went straight up to New Haven and plunged into, my first year of college, which was challenging and difficult actually. And but the Mets won the World Series that fall, which will tell everyone worth their salt who's a New Yorker, like what year this was. And by that time, I'd made a couple of friends who were New Yorkers who were like, forget all your classes, we're going to the city. And we got on the train, which I'd never done, onto Metro North. And we took the train into Grand Central, which I'd never seen. And we walked out of Grand Central into New York where I'd never been. And I went, and they were like, Susan, don't do that. I was like, I'm sorry. And we went to see the Mets have their victory parade. And it was like, that's the first day I ever was in this city. Was like one of the most, I think, over the top, joyous, like insane days in the entire history of the city. And it was incredible. And, you know, that was like the moment where I couldn't believe a place like this was, you know.
And you'd never kind of experienced something that large and that almost partying in the streets atmosphere.
Oh my God. I mean, it was iconic. Like I'd seen, it was like I was in Life magazine or something, you know, it was a freaking parade for the Mets with like, you know, hundreds of thousands of people in the streets, like screaming. I was from Houston, like the Astros had been eliminated, if anybody remembers their 1986 baseball. So my mother was like, you can't go see the Mets. But you know, that was it. I wasn't really a baseball person, but it was a thing that I didn't know could happen, like a huge, joyous coming together of so many people.
That's so beautiful. Quick question. Do you have like a Mets hat? Any Mets? I know you're not a baseball person. Like, have you been to an actual Mets game since? Okay.
Yes. And I have made a Mets fan with my own body.
I was going to say one of your sons is a big Mets fan. Fantastic. Yeah. That's wonderful. All right. So this next one, I'm going to throw it out there. Whoever feels like maybe they have, you know, that quick thought, that quick brain. But what was
but Isaac, when did you fall in love with New York?
Oh, no. I am a moderator, Min. I appreciate what you're doing, but I thought up the questions. I don't have to think up the answers.
Oh, come on.
That's how. Okay. All right. So.
Short answer, Isaac.
I remember, just for the record, just like Marlon, I too had a lot of kind of a fictionalized picture of New York in my head long before I visited the city. I will not lie. I once worked on an island off the coast of New Hampshire. On that island, this was before the internet. We only had one TV, one DVD player, and one full season, every season, full set of Sex and the City. So Marlon, your shame is my shame.
I have no shame about it.
I like that you can live. That's good. You're living your truth. I'm still working through it. But I watched, basically I know far too much about Sex and the City, but basically at a younger age, I would argue the first time, like the memory that I have is my parents saved up a bit of money and they took me to Broadway when I was probably like 8 years old.
What did you see?
It was the biggest trip I'd ever been on. I don't think I'd been out of the state at that point. And we saw Phantom of the Opera.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fine, man. You can judge. But
no, it's great.
Let me tell you, I loved it. And my parents have a photo of me still. And they could not afford it, but they bought the $40 Broadway T-shirt that was like half plastic with the Phantom of the Opera mask, all big, and a big rose. And there's a photo of me standing in front of the Flatiron Building, grinning my face off, just so happy. And so that's the Sex and the City aside, I would argue that was the moment that I fell in love with New York, but it took me years and years, like yourself, Marlon, to get here. But that's it, Susan. That's the only answer you're getting out of me. But I want to ask, what was the first book about New York City or that took place in New York City that really inspired you, or even you feel like kind of informed your work?
For me?
Anyone can take a crack at it, but Robert, if you're feeling fiery, I say go for it.
It was Go Tell It on the Mountain by James Baldwin. His Harlem is such a mystical, spiritual, glittering place with a slice of grim doom, but it is so also romantic. And there's just something so incredibly Black about the way Baldwin describes New York City. And even though he was poor, he was raised in a big family and they were very poor. And his life was home in the church. There's still this sense that New York is the place to be. It's the place of dreams. It's a place where a poor boy like James Baldwin could grow up to become the James Baldwin. And that could only be possible in a place like New York. And that's the first time in literature that I was like, this is the New York that I live in, that I imagine. And Baldwin also gave me a way to talk about New York in a way that did it justice. Because often you see in some depictions of New York, they got the grittiness, but they don't got the heart. And Baldwin was able to get all of that stuff in there. And so when my first novel is not set in New York at all, but my second novel will be. And I'm drawing a lot from Baldwin in that sense.
Can I ask, do you remember the first time you read that book? Can you remember like how it got into your hands or what age you were at when you first experienced it?
Yes, a friend of mine had it in their personal library. And he said to me, I had just come out. I was maybe about 16 or 17 years old. Had never heard of James Baldwin because when I was in high school, in the curriculum, there were no Black authors at all. So I went over to a friend's house and he said, do you know James Baldwin? I was like, no, I have no idea who that is. He says, I think you like this book. And he gave it to me. And the first time that I read it, it was a very difficult read because Baldwin writes in such a elevated, elegant way. And I was just not accustomed. But there was a scene in it where Baldwin's character and an older altar boy or something were in the church and they were play fighting. And I sensed the sexual tension. And I said, oh, okay, this is what this book is about. And so I read it over and over again until I could understand it. And it's had such an enormous impact on me and my writing.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that story. And like, again, like that is the power of a book, right? It can change maybe a whole trajectory of your life. That's a tough one to follow up, but who else has got like a kind of a New York City book that they absolutely love?
Do we have to absolutely love it?
Go nuts, Marlon. Be a wild card. I love you for that.
I don't know if I absolutely love it. And I think my opinion of it has changed as I get older. But I remember, again, reading New York when you're outside of New York, you're drawn to all these things that you think it's New York. And I remember feeling almost like a total New Yorker because I read Bonfire of the Vanities. And it felt like it was such a New York moment. It's a New York novel. I don't think it's aged that well. I'm kind of scared to read it now because I don't want to know how badly it has aged. But it was. I knew I was sort of slated for this city when all the negative stuff wouldn't turn me away from it. People are like,
say more.
I remember the first time I came to New York, I was so disappointed. I was here 10 days and I wasn't mugged. I was like, what is this all about? I thought, it's like, where's the New York I was promised? You're like,
Samantha never got mugged.
I mean, my Sex and the City wasn't my only vision of New York, but I kind of wanted it. I was like, I wanted, because New York grime is not like, it's certainly not like Florida grime. I think the thing about it, even a novel like Bonfire of the Vanities, it still has something which occasionally New York still shows. This sense, regardless of who you are, that we're kind of all in this together, which is something I think New York was stronger at showing before in the past and so on. But I think that's it. It's this sort of, it doesn't surprise me to see an old video where there's an Astor and Fab Five Freddy dancing in the same video. And again, that's the thing. I said, I want to be in Basquiat's New York. I want to be in Fab's New York, or so on. And it was that sense that this, weirdly, for a city that is considered heartless, the thing that binds New York is this sense that we're kind of all in it together. And that novel, funnily enough, did that.
Mm-hmm. It's how you discover the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, Min-Jin?
Yeah. Yeah, you want to go? Min?
No, go ahead.
My New York book is Stuart Little.
Mm-hmm.
That's like my first New York. And it's still, that New York is still so like deeply embedded in me. It doesn't, like sometimes I have to remind myself like this is that city. But also this is that city. And the things I remember about that book that made such an impression on me when I was really little and didn't really know about all the different ways that life could be arranged. I remember that regatta when Stuart is in Central Park on his little boat and he sails with all those like spoiled rich kids who have their boats. And he's like actually on the boat with like being lashed by waves and like hanging onto the mast and apartment living. I think that was the first glimpse I ever got of like apartment living in a city and how romantic that seemed and the proximities of people to each other. And I think also there's something really powerful about like the really low key acceptance of the premise. Like I think that was like early training for what New York has ended up meaning to me now, is this radical acceptance where no one's gonna be so uncool as to bat an eye if you seem different. Like I think that's part of it. It's like the pressure to accept is partly like the coolness of New Yorkers, where they're like, I'm not gonna look twice. Nope, I'm not gonna look twice. But like that idea that Stuart was a mouse born to humans and like this tall, and they were like his parents were like, certain measures have to be taken. We have to get him smaller clothes than our other children wear. But other than that, like Stuart was just a New Yorker. There was like never a moment in that book where people were like, what? A mouse? It was just, and that seemed like very New York to me, that there would be this small, very well-dressed, gentlemanly mouse. And I think that's a New York that I really love, E.B. White's New York. And much later when I was grown up and I read his book, Here is New York, I was really moved. But he got all those ideas into Stuart Little even before I read the grown-up version.
That's incredible. I will share with you, Susan, that I too love Stuart Little.
Love
and
it.
That boat scene very much spoke to me. And I believe I was probably 33 years old and I was walking through Central Park and I saw that that's a real place where there really are little boats. Yeah. And I was like absolutely thrilled and baffled.
Central Park's the best.
Magical.
Yeah. Min, what about you?
Oh, see, it's funny. I think I have New York books at every stage of my life that are sort of canonical. So I think when I was in middle school, it was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I mean, that book just about took me out. I identified with it so strongly, this whole little girl who wanted to get an education, but then because she studied hard, her parents said, actually, we're going to focus on her mother said, we're going to focus on your brother because he's the one who needs to go to school. And then when I went to college, I remember reading Enzia Yezierska's The Bread Givers. Or Paul A. Marshall's, Brown Girl, Brown Stones. You have all these books where you have immigrants writing about immigrant experiences in New York, because that is so foundational to me. And then I remember learning like John Cheever short stories and thinking like, oh, that's a whole New York I did not know. And then it was so beautiful and elegant to me. And I thought, oh, wouldn't it be so cool to live in a co-op with doormen? I mean, to me, that was kind of mythical. It's like, I wonder what it's like to have a doorman, or even like a Joan Didion's New York, this kind of essayistic, leaving all that. Or The Fire Next Time by Baldwin, which just about killed me. And I live in Harlem right now. So every time I sort of pass by certain areas, I think, oh, I wonder what he was thinking at this moment. So I think for every borough almost I have a book, and those I guess those images have become real to me, whether it was nonfiction or fiction. They're absolutely real to me, and they also help me understand America. So I'm always surprised when I leave New York and it's not like the way I think people are going to be, because I kind of, New Yorkers for me are my first reference point.
Absolutely. I love what you're describing when you come across a place that you've read in a book, and that most recently, or the reverse, you're reading a book and you know exactly the place that they're talking about. And that happened most recently for me with the Nickel Boys, Colson Whitehead's most recent book. He's describing a restaurant at the top of Hamilton Hill. And I was like, I've eaten there. I knew exactly. And then I was lucky enough to be in conversation with Colson. And right before the event, I was like, I just need to know, is this that restaurant? And he was like, oh yeah, no, that was absolutely it. So it's this like beautiful feeling when you kind of are either in the place and you remember it from the book, or you're in the book and you're able to really visualize the place. The next question is just kind of like, how does New York inform your writing? Like, what about the city inspires you? And go all over the place with this, whether it's very like, Min, you have that wonderful piece in the New York Times. If you want to go like the very nonfiction route and the very true route, or just like a more meta route, like how does New York City, living in New York City, what about the city? How does it influence your writing and your art? And what about the city kind of inspires you? And Marlon, I'm going to put you in the hot seat because I know there's a lot of New York scenes and killings. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat and start with you, sir.
Oh, Lord. But you know, a lot of those New York scenes in Brief History were written in Minnesota. So it's still added as New York. Also, a lot of those scenes are 1980s, the 80s New York and 80s Bronx, which was pretty tough to live in. At the same time, when it gets to the 90s, it's the Bronx that I finally know personally. The house where the character lives is actually a house on Corsa Avenue, and the character has a name. The character is a nurse and has a name sort of like my sister-in-law, so she's convinced it's her because she's a nurse, Jamaican nurse living in the Bronx on that exact street. It's not her.
I mean, just for the record, I'm kind of going with your sister-in-law on that one.
Right where you know, Isaac. Yeah, but I actually, one of the things that frightened me about New York for a while, which I think delayed me moving here, is I really worried for a while I wouldn't be able to write here. Mostly because I figured I was going to be so distracted, because coming here as a tourist and a visitor is so different from coming here to live here. When you're visiting New York, you're out all the time. I'm doing this, I'm seeing that. People complain, I saw you a lot more when you're in New York 4 times a year than when you live here, which is totally true. So I was worried for a while that I actually wouldn't be able to write here. And but then coming here and sitting into a routine, I realized all the things I need to write are here. I grew up in noise. I'm a big Jamaican family. People aren't going to shut up so you can do your term paper. So I find myself, I find myself opening the window because I need traffic. And I need noise, and I need the sense that life is going on while I'm writing this really bad draft of a book. Because I don't know, it just sort of continually puts me in perspective. And and when you're a visitor, you notice things that I don't know if lifelong New Yorkers know. Like certainly, Bronx noise is not Manhattan noise. And Manhattan noise is not Brooklyn noise. And also Williamsburg noise is not Park Slope noise. When you depend on outside to write, you tend to know the different areas, and you tend to know what they sound like and so on. And yeah, I silence to me feels like deafness. So I need it, and I feed off that energy, and I can't think of any other place where I'd rather feed off, right? Really.
Marlon, I got to ask follow-up question here. what neighborhood or borough or area is your favorite noise?
I'm so not answering that.
Or time period. I would even go.
Matt, you know what? I keep thinking I'd really like to see Lily Bart's New York. Although I'm still convinced Edith Wharton is a snob first, writer second.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I keep thinking, it's like it reminds me of the days when all these people I know who I'm not friends with would have these Mad Men parties. And I can't come to your party because if I go, I'd have to be in a white suit saying, "Would you like a canapé with that, sir?" So, so I'm very, I have a very careful nostalgia about that era because I know the role I'd play in that era. So, but I mean, I would give anything to see the birth of hip hop.
Yeah.
I'd give anything to have seen that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a damn good answer. Min, what about you? Obviously moved here at the age of 7. How's the city informed your work?
I was thinking about this because we're talking earlier about how literature and the word are kind of connected, or the image are connected. And there's an essay that I read by NYPL, I think when I was in college, about how when he was growing up in Trinidad as a South Asian person, as an immigrant, he always had this flower that he really loved. And then later on, he moves to England and he learns that the name of the flower is jasmine. So the thing that he had known all of his life, he got the word when he was actually at university in England. And I was thinking about how much NYPL's influenced me, even though he was kind of like a racist, sexist asshole, but his work is so good. It's so good. I mean, A House for Mr. Biz none of us were worthy. And NYPL is the one who really kind of taught me about the audacity that immigrants can have in a place like New York. And I think that's the thing that I have, even though I'm an introverted person, I would much rather never talk. Like if I could, I would never talk. I would just be in my room. I'm perfectly content here. Look how clean and happy my room is. Like I would never leave. That said, there's a part of me that really feels like, why not? Why can't I do that? And even if people tell me no 100 times, 1,000 times, there's a part of me that just feels very kind of, I think this is New York-y. Like, why not me? Why couldn't I do that? And I think that always carries into everything. And when I wrote my first book, which is set in New York City, I wanted to talk about how poor people, how immigrant people could have a why not attitude and become creatives. And I think that's the gift of New York to me. And also of a certain era, because sometimes I meet other Asian American immigrant kids and they seem so much more shy. And I kind of think, in a way, sometimes like they grew up in wealthier neighborhoods. Whereas I think I grew up with really tough people. So in a way, even though I wasn't tough with them, they gave me a kind of toughness that I could take somewhere else when I'm elsewhere. And that's the gift for me from New York.
Bravado.
Audacity.
Audacity. I absolutely love it.
Or cojones.
Susan, what about you?
I think, I've loved listening to what everybody's saying and what you guys are saying. Your thoughts are bringing so many thoughts into my mind, but I keep returning to the first thought I had when you voiced this question, Isaac, which was writing community. Sometimes when I hear from people who will, contact me and ask me about being a writer and how to do it, or I'll talk to students about, how do I have a writing life, or meeting people, in various other places who want to know that question. And I'm always I have to remind myself that like most places aren't like this. And I think what I mean by that is that when I came to New York, I was so incredibly fortunate, without realizing it, to continually fall in with one brilliant writer after another. I know so many friggin' writers. It's amazing, all of you. But it's something that I think it's easy to forget if you live in New York, that, the very first job I landed in New York landed me among amazing, aspiring writers, many of whom I treasure to this day, who've all gone on to do interesting things. And, the first writing space I rented, I was surrounded by amazing writers. And I happened to rent a writing space now in which I'm surrounded by quite brilliant people, some of whom are on this screen. So it's just like the sheer density in New York of people who are doing this, but then the number of different ways in which they're doing it, like you're swimming in that all the time, right? And in other parts of this world, you don't have that, you know? And so I'll meet people, or I'll hear from people, or I'll talk to students who will say like, how do I meet writers? What do I do? How do I find a community? Like, what is this thing you talk about of like sharing your work with somebody else? Who? And I'm like, oh, right. They're not surrounded by like other people who do this. And that's what New York has always been, without an effort. Like, you don't have to put out a want ad here to like meet a bunch of, I mean, you know, it's like just walk outside, or you don't even have to walk outside anymore. So that's, I think, what this city is. It's what I could never give up.
That is such a beautiful answer. I need to ask a follow-up here. What was that first job?
I was a fact checker at the New Yorker magazine.
Damn good. That's a damn good first job. And
it was a great first job. And I'll tell you, like everybody down to like the people who brought your mail to your desk, everyone wanted to write, duh. And a lot of us did and do. It was like a second college, but better than college, I have to say.
and met better people. And Robert, obviously, like this is home. But how did this city, and how does it inform your work?
You know, I remember I grew up in the 70s, so I remember New York when it was in its challenging times, when crime was skyrocketing and landlords were burning down their own buildings for the insurance money. So everything was blight and an empty lot and darkness and poor services and no amenities and all of these things. And yet through all of that, I remember myself and my cousins playing in those burnt down buildings and those empty lots, and we kind of turned it into a playground. So then we move, and to Marlon's point earlier, I actually did get to witness the birth of hip hop. That also came out of that blight. And then you move into the 80s and you have the crack epidemic. And even in that, though, what I found was, for example, I lived in a housing project in South Brooklyn, and there were quite a few drug users in the building. And none of us were related to one another, but what we would do is when we knew that somebody's mom or dad was out using drugs and not taking care of home, somebody else's mother will cook food for the kids. And so out of all of these horrors came a kind of care that I have never seen elsewhere. And I think in my writing, I'm always trying to capture that dichotomy of how on one side there's this really harsh, hard, gray sort of madness. And on the other side, there's this just warm embrace. And those two things together sort of make you realize the importance of the other, or how, you know, you need the masculine, the feminine, the yin, the yang. You need those two things, as horrible as one of those things might be, to get the beautiful thing. And I think my writing is a way of trying to work that out. And talking about, Marlon said something about noise and needing to hear the noise. I'm actually the opposite. I need silence. But I also find that my best writing happens on the subway or on the bus, or when I'm sitting on my stoop, or when I'm in Central or Prospect Park, where there are other bodies. And that's, I think, I don't need the noise, but I need the other people to be populating the background for me so that I could dig deeper. And so New York gives me all of those things, and I am forever indebted.
That is beautiful. Just quick follow-up for your writing, as you came into your own as a writer, Was there a moment or was there a time when you started realizing you were trying to find this balance? Maybe you were walking really hard down one line and then you're like, wait, this is missing that kind of other side of it.
Writing The Prophets is when I actually realized that this had been in my writing for a very long time. I just never really realized it until writing The Prophets, and my editor, Sally Kim, noticed it. And I was like, oh, I think I know where that comes from. And it's because the first thing I thought of when she said that was myself and my cousins playing in this, like, New York, Brooklyn at the time looked like a war zone. And we were playing in the midst of all of that. And so you have joy and pain like lined up right next to one another. And that was the first thing that it made me think about. And I thought, that's New York. That's New York's influence on me and in my writing.
That's wonderful. And I'm just going to do this because I love a layup. The Prophets comes out when, sir?
January 5th.
That is correct, and everyone should really look for it. Yeah, seriously, it's a tough time to be having a book come out, but congratulations. I've heard all the early praise, and congratulations that. I'm going to ask. Sorry, what was that, Marlon?
I think it's a phenomenal novel.
There it is. I'm going to ask one last question, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. So if you have a question, drop it there in the Q&A, and I'm sure they will be wonderful and insightful. We're going to keep this one kind of tight, y'all. But my last question is, when this is all over, and of course, we know it might be more of a slow drip than a single moment. But when you are feeling comfortable and you're ready to get back out into the city in a very real way, what is the first thing you are going to do in New York City that you can't do right now, that you were not able to do this year?
Have a party.
At your house?
Yeah.
In your own space?
Yeah, bring people in. Everyone I want to see.
Are we all invited on this panel?
Yes.
What kind of party is it going to be?
Isaac, what does it need? It's just going to be all of us in the same space. I'm just wondering, is it like a dinner party? Is it like am I bringing a keg? What party are we talking? Yeah. If you're signed up for the keg now.
Oh God.
That will work.
Right. A big house party.
I also want to have a party. I want to have a book release party at the Brooklyn Museum.
Mm.
But I can't do that now. Like it's really killing me that I won't be able to have a book release party and have everyone that I love and all of my friends around. But that's the dream. Once everything opens back up, I want a book release party.
You'll have every paperback, if not just in a delay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Susan. I'm kind of like, who makes these rules? I say if it's May or June or fall, like just have one and we'll all be there. What about you, Lynn?
I want to see a live performance.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I'm dying to go to the theater, and then I'm gonna make out with a stranger. I'm just. JK. I'm 52. I'm past that. But no, but I'm dying to go to the theater and sit and have this sort of communal experience of seeing a live performance. I so miss that so much.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go to the East Village and order a really, really huge plate of Malaysian fried chicken from Pig and Cow restaurant, which I really shouldn't be eating, but I think I'm allowed it.
Yes.
And they're gonna ask, would you want this or this? And I was gonna go, yes. That's what I'm doing.
You're just gonna order the whole menu.
Order the whole menu at Pig and Cow in the East Village. That's what I'm gonna do.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely love that. Well, listen, before we get into these questions, give yourselves a round of applause. Everyone at home, go ahead and clap. Good job, everybody. We've got some wonderful questions pouring in, so I'm just gonna jump right into them. For the panelists, just feel free to shout out your answers. Maybe we won't go for every single person on every single one for these. But New York Mag's latest issue is dedicated to all the New York spots that are now forever gone because of the pandemic, coronavirus. What's a bygone New York spot for you?
Oh, Curry Dodd. I'm so upset that Caridad is closed, which is in the Upper West Side on like 79th and Broadway. There's a Cuban Chinese restaurant.
And it
What's
closed.
very bad.
And
But
it
did
closed.
it close during the pandemic or before that?
I think it was around the pandemic. I think it was definitely 2020, and I'm heartbroken.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else? Is there a place that's closed that you're gonna?
I don't know yet. I'm scared. I just said I'm going to go to Pig and Cow. Maybe I should check if they're still open.
Yeah. Heartbroken that Hanky has closed.
Yeah. That's the Korean spot.
The
Right?
Korean spot that's half a block from, a place we know very well. They're gone.
Yeah,
Heartbroken.
absolutely. Robert, do you have any?
No spots that have closed because of the pandemic, but I do miss all the New York City nightlife places like the Limelight, all Sound Factory Bar, the Warehouse. I miss all of those places. That seems to be from a bygone era. That's not something the kids like to do these days.
Yeah, no, listen, Robert, I have a great book for you. It's a coffee table book. It's called In the Limelight, and it's all these photos from the 90s club scene. I will absolutely email you about it, but yes. I feel you on that.
Yeah. That was one of the New Yorks that I was also drawn to. I thought I'd be dancing a whole lot more. And then who was it? Giuliani got rid of the clubs or something?
Ugh.
Don't speak his name.
Forget that guy. Next question is, it feels like every aspect of New York has been written and photographed, captured in art before. How does one make this city a setting without falling into cliche traps?
Write about the people.
Mm-hmm. Say more.
Well, I mean, I just think that any book actually is only going to be good if the characters are good. And I think that if the characters are New Yorkers, that's what it's about. It doesn't matter if the city's been written about a bunch of times. It's their story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like, don't write a New York book. It's got to have good characters. And if it has good characters, its New York will be good.
I totally agree with Suzanne. It's 4 characters in a room looking at an Empire State Building are looking at 4 different Empire State Buildings. When Suzanne talked about the skyline of New York, when she saw it, it was sort of gray and big and maybe kind of ugly. My first New York skyline was at midnight. So all I saw was just this sort of, it almost felt like it was light dancing on light, and then it was, you're driving in and you're seeing the river and you're seeing, I think at one point I went, do humans live here? What is going on here? It was this ridiculous world of wonder. And I'm looking at the same thing. It's not the site though, really, that matters. It comes back to the characters. It's the people. It's how character is seeing that bodega opposed to character B. And I think it's when you realize that, then New York will always seem a world of wonder to whoever is reading whatever you're reading.
I also think that New York can't really be stereotyped. And very often whenever I meet assholes in New York, they're usually not from here. They really have this idea of what New York is going to be like. So let's say, you have an idea of what Staten Island is like, but then if you know people from Staten Island, you know that they would actually lend you $10 if you needed it. So there's a kind of closure of an idea of what New York is. And what's amazing about New York is you can have a Cheever New York, and you can have a Diddy in New York, and you can also have a Pauly Marshall New York, and they're all New York. Mm-hmm. So if you're really focused on the real people of New York, then you're not going to fall into cliche.
I think that's beautiful. Also, shout out to the Staten Island Ferry. It's free. It's a free boat ride. Great views, and the beers on it, tall boys, still very, very inexpensive. So, and also at the moment, not very big crowds. You wear a mask. It's mostly outside. You can do it safely even right now. Robert, I want to start with you for this next one, which is basically a question of how has the pandemic changed how you see the city? And also just like, do you think you'll be writing about a different New York City when you emerge from quarantine? New York City has always been changing. Have you thought about how it might change going forward?
You know, at first, I had been spending so much time in the house that I didn't think or realize how much the city had changed during this time. But then my husband and I went to Soho a couple of weeks ago to do some shopping, and everything was boarded up. So many stores were out of business, and so very few stores were open, and there was almost no one there. Even Chinatown was practically empty. And it made it feel sort of dystopian and post-apocalyptic. And I thought, can we recover from this? It was the first time that I ever feared for New York, because I was actually not in New York City when 9/11 happened. I was living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I came back a year after 9/11, which, by the way, when I left New York, it was all rude New Yorkers. And when I got back, everyone was the kindest I had ever known New Yorkers to be. I mean, I think 9/11 had something to do with that. But fortunately enough for me, the New York that I will be writing about next is a particular time period in the past. So I have that etched in my mind. But if I was going to write about this New York, I would definitely take into account the desolation I felt when I walked into Soho, where I used to work at the Scholastic store. It was always crowded, always fashionable, always, bustling, and there was nothing. It was literally papers blowing in the wind, and it was just scary. And that this event has really shifted my thinking about cities to begin with, because we're also crowded, and look how quickly this illness could spread in spaces like this. So I'm now a little bit nervous and scared, and that's going to definitely come out in my writing if I write about contemporary New York.
Anybody else thinking about what it might be to kind of write this next phase of New York? And if anybody's quiet, I can do a quick story, and then we're going to ask one final question because we're running low on time. But to your point, Robert, I've been experiencing that. I've been going on kind of these long walks. It's a way of trying to stay sane right now, as I put on a mask and I just try to just walk. And I've been walking into Manhattan, over the bridges. And it's been more recently, it's been reassuring to see the city almost coming back to life in a way. Again, lots of masks, dining outside, etc. But the moment for me where I definitely think, like, cities are living and breathing things, right? They're always changing. You know that, Min. You know that you spent most of your lives in the city. It's a living, breathing, changing thing. But for me, there was this kind of moment where I was like, New York, it's gonna be fine. And that was, I was walking in the opposite direction, and a gentleman in a wheelchair said, "Hey, could you help me with my zipper?" And I said, I'm sorry, I don't have anything on me. He said, no, I'm not looking for your money. Can you help me with my zipper on my jacket? And I said, oh, of course. And I walked over and I helped him with the zipper. And he said, could you just push me to the end of the block in the opposite direction? So I was like, oh, of course I can. And I pushed him to the end. He said, just one more block. So anyways, about 5 blocks later, we get to a bodega, and he says, there's no ramp. And he says, hey, could you just run in and grab me some beer? And again, I said, I'm sorry, I don't have anything. He's like, again, I don't need your money. He takes out the money, exact change, hands it to me, tells me what to go in and buy. And I went in, bought it, gave it back to him. And I was like, if I can fall victim to a con of a help me with my zipper that turns into a 20-minute excursion where I am buying beer for somebody, everything's going to be a little bit all right, is kind of my takeaway from that. But again, it will be different. There's no denying that what this city went through this year was incredibly, massively difficult, and we're still in it. It will be different, but I do think it's gonna be all right. And with that, I'm gonna end with this very earnest Isaac question. It's from the audience though, but I loved it so much. Where is your favorite writing place in New York? Where's your favorite place to either read or write? Again, let's imagine the pandemic is not happening. where would you go to read or write? Marlon, I'm just going to go right down the line. So I'm going to you.
Right. I'm still thinking. Ask somebody else.
Susan, I'm going right to you. Other direction in the line.
Honestly, my favorite place to read is in my backyard. And I during the early weeks of lockdown, I was actually there was a happiness to it because I just sat behind my house feeling like I was on this island, and I would just sit all day. And there's one big tree in the east, and I would face that big tree and read. And then as the sun moved, I would rotate. And there's another big tree in the west, both of them, of course, in the backyards of neighbors of mine. And I think about if those neighbors ever decide to cut those trees down, I'll be so depressed. I'll go like crying to their house. But I love sitting back there and looking at my two trees that aren't mine and reading. I never write back there, but I do read.
What about writing? Is there a spot in the city where you would love to write?
You know, I struggle with finding the right place to write all the time. There have been spots and then they go bad for me. But I did love I had a shared workspace with a bunch of women writers in a loft on Flatbush Avenue, a bunch of women journalists, poets, a filmmaker or two, some fiction writers, bunch of broken garbage furniture and never enough heat. And I loved working there with those people around me.
What about you, Robert?
My place I love to read is in my bed. That under the covers, reading glasses, book up close. That's my favorite place to read. To write, I actually have several different places in the city that I love to write. Front of my house on the stoop, Belvedere Castle in Central Park, and on the subway. For a long ride. So I'll ride from one end to the other end, just because there's something about the movement and the rhythm, and again, being surrounded by people that just like helps my creativity. But those are my favorite places to write.
I love that. Min?
I love to read on the subway. And as a matter of fact, because I'm not taking the subways right now, not very much. So I think in a way I've actually cut down my reading. And also my attention has been a little bit damaged this year. I don't know why. And then the other place I like to read is, and I can't wait, is at the Temple of Dendor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Like if I'm really having a hard time with life, that's where I go. And I kind of go, I used to work there. Actually, I sold books there when I was a kid. And that's a good place for me to read. I can't write anywhere else except my home, wherever my home is. So it's impossible. I've tried.
So is it in this room that we're looking at?
It's either this room or wherever I was living at any point in my life. But yeah.
Got it.
This is where it all happens, people. This is where the magic happens.
Where it happens.
And Marlon, did you have time?
I get almost all of my reading done on the subway.
Right.
That's where it is, and that's and I miss it. I miss the subway terribly, even though I love biking all over New York. That's how I got most of my reading done, and I still have that feeling about those books. The other place I love reading is my friend Kurt's house. He has a brownstone on in 160 between Nicholas and Amsterdam. I'm just out to the man's house.
I'm gonna walk right over.
He used to run one of the few like Black interest bookstores. It was called Word Bookstore, and I used to pretty much live in that bookstore and just surrounded by. It was the first time as somebody coming to America to be surrounded by just literary legacy. And reading it and sinking myself into it and writing, and I've written a lot at his house as well. But Washington Heights, man, it's I knew all my neighbors, and I was in this fantastic place. I could read anywhere.
I absolutely love that. I am going to break my promise earlier and answer that question as well, which is I'm going to just say, when this is all over, I am going to go to the New York Public Library. I am going to sit in all of the rooms. I am going to climb the lions, which I'm pretty sure they do not appreciate at all. I'm sure they don't want me to encourage that, but I will kiss both of those lines on the lips. And I cannot wait to go to the New York Public Library. But in the meantime, until we have
reading room. That's where I
would you say,
and sit in the Rose reading room.
right? Exactly. And just look and be in that space.
When Isaac said kiss the lands, I'm like, Isaac, stop trying to turn New York into Boston.
All right, listen, I deeply appreciate that you all came here. Thank you so much for this wonderful panel. And I'm going to do it one last time. Everybody give a deep round of applause. Thank you to everybody that joined us. And of course, thank you so much to the NYPL for making tonight happen. It was absolutely fantastic. We love the workers. Everyone look for Robert's book. It's coming out in January. And we'll see y'all later. Thank you so much, y'all. New York forever.
Black text on white background. New York Public Library Lion logo, 125 years. Learn more about the New York Public Library, nypl.org.